I think that my work with young people in schools, and I'm actually also really involved with Girl Guides of Canada, so I work with young people lots. And I think that one of the things that I'm just like in constant awe of is the fact that they are so smart. They know so much more than I knew when I was in high school. They're more engaged in politics, in conversations around power and privilege. So I do have a lot of faith that that generation will be able to make some changes.
Hello, I'm Eric Anderson. The voice you just heard belongs to Natalya Mason. She is the featured guest in episode 2, season 3 of YXC Underground. Natalya Mason puts her heart into everything she does. Whether it's in her role as outreach and education coordinator for Saskatoon Sexual Health, or if she's addressing a crowd at a Black Lives Matter rally, Natalya's conviction and principles shine through. You're about to meet a true community leader in this episode of YXC Underground. Let's go back in time, say, to your grade 6 health classroom. For me, that means Fairview School on the south side of Swift Current. It's 1993 and day 1 of sex education. Miss Redekop wheels out the overhead projector and places a slide that is blown up on the blackboard. It's a slide of a penis. And all of us boys in the back, we just froze. We had no idea what was happening, and in no way were we mature about it. And I'm not even going to go into what happened when the slide of the vagina was put up on the projector. I share this story with you because I definitely think times have changed when it comes to sex education, and that's thanks to people like Natalya Mason. For the past 6 years, Natalya, who is a social worker, has been educating students of all ages, and that includes university students, about all things sex. Why is Natalya's role in our community so important? That's a question I asked Saskatoon Sexual Health's Executive Director, Heather Hale.
So as we know, sex education in Saskatchewan is not always fantastic, and often having a resource in the community who can provide that service is necessary to make sure that young folks get the information they need to make good choices about their body. Now, Natalya is a great human and really fantastic at her job. So she brings this really unique blend of approachability and style, as well as a level of knowledge that's really important. So being able to blend that approachability and that kind of fact-based, no-nonsense, telling it like it is, loves to talk about sex, but also has the information to back it up. So she not only knows the stats and the figures, but also the pedagogy of teaching sex ed. So how to connect with young people, but also doing it in a way that is evidence-driven. What we know from the research is that there's a model of sex education called comprehensive sexuality education. So it's a way in delivering sex ed that is sex positive and education or information based. And so when youth have all of the information that they want to know, so including how to protect themselves, pleasure-orientated sex ed, and those other skills about how to negotiate relationships, so what sometimes people call soft skills or consent-based skills, they actually make better decisions and are able to negotiate situations. So what happens is that when folks have their sexual debut, they are more often using protection or contraceptives. They're less likely to get a STI, and they actually do it later in life.
As you heard Heather mention, Natalya is a wonderful fit for this role in our community, and you will soon hear why. Natalya and I met on a beautiful Saturday morning a few weeks ago at the Vimy Memorial in Kiwanis Park. The reason why we met there was it was the site of several Black Lives Matter protests this past summer in Saskatoon. Natalya attended those protests and spoke at the events. We talk about why her involvement in the protests was so important to her in the second part of our conversation, but in this first part, we focused on her role with Saskatoon Sexual Health. I started by asking Natalya how she ended up working for the organization, and I really love her answer.
If I'm honest, it was my dream job. I was working for the University Students' Union prior to that in their help center, and by the end of it, I'd basically just turned it into like a sexual health help center, which I don't think my boss appreciated. And so when I saw this job come up as the education coordinator, I wanted it so bad. And I like submitted my application and I interviewed, and I think I didn't hear back for like quite a long time, and I was so annoyed. I was literally like, who could they have chosen for this job besides me? I just don't understand. I said that I love brochures in my cover letter, and
You really said that in your cover letter?
yes, like I was like, I love educational health pamphlets, and it turns out that my former boss had fallen down the stairs and actually like broken her ankle or something, and so it was taking her a little bit longer to get through her work. So I did end up getting the job, which I was really thankful for.
Okay, so there's lots to pull from there. So when you're back at the university and you have this job, what made you so passionate about sexual health?
I think it's always been something that I was interested in. Even when I was younger, I remember like friends coming up to me and asking questions, and I would tell them like that information isn't true, or who told you that? And I think that people are always just like dying for more information about their sexual health or about relationships, especially like in university. And it's not something that's super easily accessible. So I've always really liked being able to answer those questions. And you also always have a captive audience when you're talking about sexual health. Like people just like will eat it up. They want to hear everything. They want to know.
So when you were back in university, what types of questions were you receiving that you were just like, yeah, I can talk about this, and here's this information?
Probably more so just questions about like relationships. Is this normal? Is it okay for me to want this or expect this? Or I'm in this relationship and it's really hard, or it's becoming abusive. Like, what do I do? Where do I go from there? And trying to put people on the right path was always really helpful. Also, sometimes, stuff like related to abortion, that kind of information is really hard to find in Saskatoon. And so sending people in the right direction was always my main goal. I kind of looked at it as I might not always be the right door, but I'll make sure that they find the right door afterwards.
Were they comfortable coming to you, or was there a sense of nervousness or anxiety?
I think people are always nervous when they want to talk about sexual health. I mean, I do this in classrooms now, and the kids are always like really uncomfortable and anxious. But for me, because this is like what I deal with all the time, all day long, there's rarely anything I haven't heard before. So I think that makes it a little bit easier. And to just like reassure people that their questions are totally normal and that everyone has those questions and everyone struggles with those things.
I want to get to the classroom stuff in a bit, because I have lots of questions about that as well. I have flashbacks of grade 6 sexual health in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, and yeah, oh gosh, yeah. But you said too, like in high school, people will come up and ask you questions, and I wonder, like, where did you get your knowledge at such a young age?
My mom actually was one of those parents who worked really hard to make sure that we had the information that we needed. And maybe this was telling of my future career, but I remember her having gone to the library to pick out a bunch of books about sexual health, or not sexual health, but like where do babies come from, to give to me. And she was wanting to like go through them and read and choose whichever one she thought was appropriate. But I went into her room and had read them all before she like ended up choosing the one to give to me. So I've always just been really curious about those kinds of things.
Wow. That's that's so interesting. Like you knew from early on, like this was going to be your path. So you write this cover letter. You love your brochures. You start you start the job at Saskatoon Sexual Health. How did you make then the job kind of your own, like you did at the university?
So I think that the first piece was getting the lay of the land, and there's always like a bit of an imposter syndrome going on where you're not sure that you do have the knowledge or the answer to those questions. One of the things that I've kind of learned along the way is that it's not about having all of the answers all the time. It's more being willing to help someone find the answers that they need. But as I've spent more time in that role, I think that I've paid lots of attention to kind of the landscape and the things that are happening in Saskatchewan, and have been slowly picking away at them, trying to address gaps.
Tell me more about the gaps. Where do you see the gaps, especially in Saskatchewan?
So just sexual health education in general. Our curriculum hasn't been updated since 2009, which is more than a decade, and the world has really changed since then. So we work really hard at offering presentations for high school students, but we also have some specialized programming. We put together a program with Inclusion Saskatchewan and Creative Options in Regina that I'm just really incredibly proud of. It's called Never TMI, and Tell It Like It Is. Never TMI is the website, and it's a sexual health and wellness program for people with disabilities. And lots of times programs for people with disabilities are very like abuse prevention focused, and they don't allow people to talk about what having a relationship would look like, or how they might find a partner, or what kind of things they would do on a date. And so those are all elements that are included in that program, and so that always brings me like lots of joy. We have a program that we worked on with the Open Door Society that's a newcomer sexual health and wellness program.
I'm so excited you mentioned that, because that was one of my questions when I was on the website, and I think, you know, I clicked under kind of your section, education, and saw all the different programs, and that one stood out to me because, you know, as I did an episode last year at the Global Gathering Place, and they do so much great work with newcomers, and we went through a lot of the sort of challenges, but I never thought of sexual health as one of those challenges when you come from a different country. So that, like, what does that program look like?
There's a lot of time spent talking about cultural norms or religious norms, because we're not going to be the person that says the way that you did that at home isn't okay or not right, but it is important to have conversations and say, you know, dating might look really different in Canada, and so these are some of the skills that you're going to need, or these are some of the things that are appropriate or aren't appropriate. Even having conversations about differences in like cultural approaches to sexuality. And I ended up having a really challenging conversation with some students about homosexuality, and them just thinking that it was really not okay. And for me, that was like a really tough conversation to have in that moment. But I also think that it's really important that we do take the time to allow those conversations, so that if they want to, people can also change their minds.
How do you approach those types of challenging conversations? Because, like you said, in your mind, you're thinking, well, that's like, I'm sure there's a part of you that wants to say, well, no, you're not right about that. But how do you approach that as a facilitator?
I think that my technique is usually just to hear them out, to get them to explain that, and then to also just recognize that they're entitled to their opinions. And at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, they don't necessarily need to be accepting of people if they don't want to be, but they do need to be respectful to other people. So choosing to say, like, I maybe disagree on that specific issue, but I see you as a person, and I think that we could still have a relationship.
Can you remember too a time where like there was maybe like a really different kind of cultural norm where people were coming here, and maybe surrounding dating that was just really different, and like your education really was beneficial?
Just the idea that in Canada we typically choose our own partners. So you meet them in a coffee shop or on a dating app or at school or whatever else, and you're free to make that choice on your own. Lots of people come from cultures where partners are chosen by their families, and so I think that there's often friction between parents and young people coming to Canada because they're assimilating into some of those cultural norms, maybe wanting to make some of those decisions for themselves. And at the end of the day, I think it's always just about finding balance and something that, you know, feels right to you, respecting like your culture, but also what you want as an individual.
Do you enjoy, Natalya, the collaboration like with Saskatoon Open Door Society, or with groups involved with people with disabilities? Do you enjoy that kind of collaboration?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In social work, there's a saying, nothing about us without us. And I take that to heart, essentially meaning that you don't develop programs for people without involving them in that program development. So working with the experts in any like particular given area is one way that we can make sure that the programs work for them and are successful. So those partnerships are, I think, some of the things that make me most proud about the work that we've done.
Can you now take me into the schools and what what you do with like is it elementary, is it high school, like what does that look like for you?
So yeah, I work with students anywhere from probably about grade 4 or 5. Talking about puberty would be the youngest class, maybe even grade 3. I'm trying to think what happened last year. And then I'll work with students all the way up into post-secondary. Sometimes that's professional development with nursing students or medicine students or social work students. And sometimes the post-secondary students themselves are just getting a sex ed lesson because they need it. They still haven't had that education. So it kind of depends where I'm going. And that'll determine what we're talking about.
Okay, so you from grade 3 all the way to university students, like
Yeah.
you must have to really sort of adapt on the fly.
There's a lot of switching gears. I remember being in a class, and it was probably grade 4 or 5 students. We were talking about puberty, and I could tell that there was some kids in the class. This neighborhood was kind of like half affluent and half not affluent, so not that that's a determining factor, but you could tell that some kids' parents had really like talk to them about sexuality and sexual health, and they knew all the like proper language for anatomy. And then I've got another kid who's just asking me so many questions about Pokemon, and I was kind of like, well, you know, when you're like Pokemon evolve, that's kind of what puberty is. And she was just like, okay. So in those moments it's really challenging because you want to make sure that the kid in the classroom that needs the information the most gets the information that they need, but you also don't want to scandalize the entire rest of the classroom, so it's a fine balance.
The fact that you knew Pokemon language, like I'm impressed by that.
Well, Pokemon's heyday was when I was in elementary school. Like I was in grade 2 or 3 when that hit the scene, so I was pretty familiar.
When you get those types of questions that are just off the wall, like I was a high school teacher for 2 years, but it was like English and social studies. Like I don't know, what my head would explode if I was trying to teach, you know, sexual health to grade 5 kids and getting sort of questions that were just, you know, kind of out there. Like how do you react?
I mean, always with humor. I think that that's been my greatest tool as an educator, is just being able to laugh. I don't take it super seriously. I also think that there's a really valuable lesson in not having all the answers as an individual, because if I stand up at the front of the classroom and I make myself look like an expert, then it kind of implies that there's a level of expertise that they might never attain and that they are never going to know all the things that I know. So if I don't know the answer to a question, I love to say, I actually don't know the answer to that question. It's a super good question. Here's how I would find it, and talk about calling the nurses or reaching out to them, or sometimes I'll say, like, I'm just going to text one of the nurses at work right now and ask. But for the most part, I think that just being willing to like take the time and like think through the questions with them always ends well. I mean, I get lots of like really inappropriate questions and things that are mildly horrifying, but they're always trying to shock me, and there is not a question that I won't answer, which ends up embarrassing them at the end of the day. So I'm pretty good at making a teachable moment out of any question, regardless of how inappropriate it was.
It's really refreshing to hear you talk about how if you don't have the answers, that's okay, and you can sort of steer them in the right direction. It sort of goes back to your, like what you said off the top in terms of that imposter syndrome, like pretending that you know everything, but you don't. That's really kind of refreshing. Is that like from day one? Is that something you've tried to be sort of conscious of?
I don't think that it's been a day one thing. I think that the longer I've been in this role, and I've been at sexual health for 6 years now, so that's a lot of answered. I have a practicum student, and I always make them add up how many questions I'm answering and like catalog all the questions basically. And I've answered 3,000, 4,000 questions about sexual health. So,
Really?
oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Sometimes when I look back at it, I'm just like, how do I do this all day? Or go into 4 grade 10 boys gym classes one after another. It's a bit of a nightmare. But
Okay, so you just rolled your eyes when you said 4 grade 10 boys classes. So there's something there.
I mean, not to call grade 10 students out, but I always say grade 9 students are really nervous and anxious because they're like new to the big kids school, and they just like want to seem like they're grown up and like mature enough to handle the class. I don't see as many 11 and 12s because sexual health isn't necessarily in the curriculum for those kids. So then the grade 10 students are kind of the last time that I'll end up talking to them. And they're not the new kid on the block anymore. They know their way around the school. And so they're always like trying to act tougher than they are and throw me off my game. And sometimes I literally will go home and take a nap over lunch in period 3, lunch in period 3, so that I can go back to the school in the afternoon with like slightly more energy.
Oh, it's that draining.
It's really tiring to be on for like 4 hours at a time, but I also do like to just kind of do the whole school in one day and get it out of the way.
So you're doing all that, and yet, you know, you mentioned too how you work with nursing students and you know, students at the university. Are you, when you speak with those students, do you find that, like, is it easier, or are there still some basics that they like maybe need some refreshing knowledge about?
Professional programs don't tend to do a very good job with things related to sexuality or sexual health. Even if you think about medicine, I'm pretty sure that the med students spend about 2 weeks on reproductive health in the course of their undergraduate studies, which doesn't make a lot of sense considering for most family doctors, reproductive health will be the majority of their practice. And so the med students actually at one point had established a separate like advocacy group, I guess, called the Reproductive Action Group, so that they could, outside of their regular class studies, learn more about reproductive health. So I think just in general, when I'm going in to talk to future professionals, you know, whether that's social workers or whether or not that's nurses or doctors, letting them know that sexuality is a really integral component of people's lives and that it's something that they need to pay attention to and that they can't just like overlook.
One of the things I really admire about social workers, and I've had the privilege of speaking with a few social workers through the podcast, is that like you do give so much in your job, and so I always ask them like how if you're able to sort of leave work at work and how you're able to sort of unwind, are you capable of doing that, Natalya? And if so, how do you do that?
I'm not the person that's good at doing that. To complicate matters, I'm actually a grad student still at the U of S, and my thesis focuses on condom use in adolescent girls. So I really do spend like a good majority of my time thinking about sexual health or reproductive health or changing policies or changing laws or, you know, things that I'm upset or frustrated about. I mean, I think I would like to get to a point in my career where I can walk away from some of the stresses of the workday, but I'm also young enough right now that I think I can bring that energy and keep it going.
You're listening to episode 2 of season 3 of YXC Underground. My name is Eric Anderson. My guest is Natalya Mason from Saskatoon Sexual Health. You can subscribe to YXC Underground on Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your podcasts. You can stream the episode on Spotify or the website yxcunderground.com. And if you like what you hear, please feel free to leave a review. Be sure to follow YXC Underground on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and that's where you'll see some lovely photos of Natalya taken by Saskatoon photographer Carrie Davidson. The summer of 2020 in Saskatoon will be remembered for many things. The cancellation of events due to the pandemic, how our community continued to grapple with the impacts of COVID-19, but it will also be remembered for when many in our community came together to say Black Lives Matter.
Can you guys hear me? All right, so a couple days ago we all gathered and we talked about George Floyd. And today what we want to share with you is that George Floyd is not the only one.
Yes.
And enough is enough.
Yes.
We're tired. We're
Yes.
fed up. We can't do this anymore.
Yes.
We can't gather anymore. We will if we have
Natalya
to,
was one of those
but we're tired.
protesters. In fact, she spoke at the marches. I remember reading a few of her quotes from the first Black Lives Matter protest that took place shortly after the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. When Natalya and I were emailing back and forth to set up our interview, she mentioned how her passion for sexual health meshed perfectly with her involvement in the local Black Lives Matter movement, and I just found that fascinating. So in the second part of our conversation, Natalya talks about why it was so important for her to march in those protests and speak out against racial injustice. She also explains how her role at Saskatoon Sexual Health fits with her passion for social justice. Natalya also shares some really personal stories in this part of our interview, and I'm very appreciative of that. I started by asking why she wanted to be so involved with the local Black Lives Matter movement.
I don't know where to start this one. So I am typically pretty involved in activism. I spoke at the Black Lives Matter rally and I said that this wasn't my first protest because I'm a Black woman, I'm also queer, and so it just feels like there's always things that you're protesting because in so many ways, my rights aren't respected or instilled or whatever else, or even just like someone who cares about having a planet to live on in the next 20 years. It seems like there's always a protest or a rally or something to attend. The Black Lives Matter stuff hit a lot closer to home, obviously. I've always been very aware of the fact that there was a lot of racism in the United States. It's weird to explain it as a Canadian because I think that I'm biracial, so my mom's white, and growing up she talked to us lots about racism and what that would look like and that we might be treated differently. And I think when I was younger, I thought that meant that like people would call me the N-word and not want to be my friend because I was Black, and that would kind of be the extent of it. And so as I got older, and especially once I got into university, I started taking classes in women's and gender studies and learning more about systems of oppression and power and privilege and how those things are also interconnected. And so when George Floyd was murdered and there was just all of this unrest in the United States, I knew that there was no way that I could stay away from that conversation, but it also became really personal. And I often don't involve myself in like online arguments that are personal because it's just like you have too much at stake and it's going to end up being painful. So like I'll go to bat for someone over, I don't know, the carbon tax. But this was something that was like really challenging for me to kind of get involved with and talk about. And I think that I kind of spent the first couple days there in just a state of shock and or tears. Like I was crying a lot, which isn't normally my reaction to those sorts of things. So in the way that it just felt so deeply personal, like I didn't feel like I had a choice besides to get involved.
The fact that it did bring you to tears and it was so personal, now that you've had like a little bit of time to maybe reflect back on what was happening in the summer, why do you think it struck you as so personal?
I think because there have been, maybe things that have happened to me in the past or situations that I've gotten out of without, ending up in trouble or ending up hurt. And thinking about how if I had been raised in the States, or even if it had been a different person that I was talking to, that the outcomes wouldn't have been the same. And I'll probably weave this back and forth, but I think that there was just also an opportunity to talk about racial injustice and the way that Indigenous people are treated in Canada, because that's something that I'm also just very aware of how unfair that treatment is. I forgot what I was going to say. Anyhow, so I wanted to be able to talk about those issues all at the same time and demonstrate to people, because I think we're really good at recognizing that the United States is quite racist, because they have slavery and we talk about it all the time and we're like, that racism was bad, but it's in the past, and we're not like that in Canada. And I know that that's definitely not the case for most Indigenous people. Oh, that's what I was going to say. My brother is 27, 28, I don't know. And he's a big Black guy and he works in construction, and so he was hauling a trailer I think it's somewhere outside Martinsville, something like that, and he ended up getting a flat on the trailer on a gravel road, and the property owner came out to approach him, and he felt he was really scared. And like to have a 27-year-old man, sorry, I'm gonna get upset with this, to have a 27-year-old man call you, like, he was almost in tears because he was really, really scared and he couldn't go anywhere. And I didn't feel like I could do anything for him at that point. And it just makes you feel like it's just so personal. Being worried that, you know, the same thing that happened to Colton Boushey might happen to him just because of the way that he looks. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. I think you bring up a really, really good point about the United States, because I think there is that sense here in Canada, and I would say, you know, in Saskatchewan too, about how that's down there. That's like, you know, it's bad what's happening down there, but we're somehow, I don't know if immune's the right word, but we're
above it.
Yes, we're above it, and yet we're like, what I really appreciate about the protest this summer is that I hope it reminded people in this city, in this community, that we're not above it at all. Did you, when you spoke at the protest and when you were marching through Saskatoon, did you get that sense that there was this, like, okay, like we're addressing something that's really important, and that hopefully people are listening?
So there was 3 different rally vigil marches for George Floyd, and I went to all 3 of them. And the second one was, I think, a little bit more impromptu, and there were so many people there, and I've never seen that kind of response to a protest in Saskatoon. And like I said, I've been protesting for years, and that was the first time that I had seen a crowd. And when people were chanting "No justice, no peace," like, I was getting so overwhelmed by it because it was just like echoing through the streets. So yeah, to some extent I do think that people were more aware and more willing to get involved. I think that a piece of that, though, was because it was more of a them problem and not an us problem. So like when it comes to police violence against Indigenous people in Saskatchewan, I stood in front of the courthouse here actually in January, I think, of last year, after the Gerald Stanley trial, and there was maybe 100 people there compared to what seemed like thousands. And it's frustrating that you don't get as much outrage for things that are happening in your community as you do for things that are happening south of the border. Because at the end of the day, there's not even a whole lot that we can do to influence change as Canadians in an American, like, political system, but there's lots of things that we can do to change that stuff in our backyard.
Are we in a time now where, like, you know, we and maybe you as well, like, do you have the ability to sort of influence and educate people on some of the changes that need to happen? Do you feel as though people are perhaps more open-minded and willing to listen to what's being said?
I think that my work with young people in schools, and I'm actually also really involved with Girl Guides of Canada, so I work with young people a lot. And I think that one of the things that I'm just, like, in constant awe of is the fact that they are so smart. They know so much more than I knew when I was in high school. They're more engaged in politics, in conversations around power and privilege. So I do have a lot of faith that that generation will be able to make some changes. But I think that people are also starting to open up to these conversations and being able to recognize that racism isn't just, you know, about calling people slurs, that it's something that's deeply embedded within our justice system, within our educational systems, within our healthcare systems, and that we need to be able to address that if we want people to be cared for going forward.
How are you able then to address that through your work with Saskatoon Sexual Health? Because I know we've been emailing back and forth a couple weeks, and you mentioned, like, your work with Saskatoon Sexual Health just meshes perfectly with your involvement with Black Lives Matter, and I was so fascinated by that, because I've been so anxious to ask you this question, like, how do the two worlds merge?
Well, so as a social worker, I've chosen to stay in sexual health really intentionally. I did my practicum in children's mental health and addiction, so counseling kids that already had experienced a fair amount of trauma in their lives, and that was really just tiring to me, in that the bad things had already happened, and I wanted to be able to prevent the bad things from happening. And sexual health is one of the best places to do that, because you're trying to teach, autonomy, the fact that people are the bosses of themselves and their own lives and their bodies, and that they get to make those decisions that feel right for them at a time that feels right for them. And that obviously translates into all elements of their lives. Even talking about healthy relationships, if you pay close attention to the trauma or the harm that happens to people in their lives, lots of it is because of unhealthy relationships, or family dynamics that have been interrupted, or people that had kids before they were ready or prepared to, or who had kids without the social supports that they needed to be able to raise those children in a healthy and safe environment. And so I think that there are so many ways that we always just talk about like sexual health and sexual health education as being preventative and upstream, and it really truly is, to me, like the definition of upstream care.
You're doing such important work. Like, do you realize that, or do your colleagues sort of are they boosters of you? Because I get the impression that at times perhaps you can be hard on yourself. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, from time to time I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I do expect to be perfectly eloquent all the time. And when you feel like you're representing people and you've only got one chance to change people's minds, you want to make sure that you're doing it right. But I have I have the best work environment, the best set of colleagues. My boss has always given me free rein to kind of pursue whatever projects I want to do and make sure that I have the resources that I need to get that work done. And yeah, a thing that I'm proud of this week is that someone came into the clinic, and I was working at reception, which is not what I'm normally doing, but needed to that day. And they asked if I had done a presentation at a facility a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh yeah, that's me. I did do that. And he was like, wow, that presentation was so fantastic. It kind of, changed my life in a lot of ways. I started coming to this clinic, and everybody always just takes such good care of me, and I tell all of my friends to come here because this is the best place to get help, and thanks for all the work that you do. And I was just like, wow, that's so nice, thank you, because I don't normally get to hear that. Sometimes I get kids yelling, hey sex lady, at me in the mall, but that's less glamorous.
It's not Grade 10 boys, is it?
Oh, guaranteed.
I think that flows nicely into the last question I have for you, because that's a really nice story you just told about that person coming to tell you how much the presentation meant to him and how it changed his life. And again, you can take this, whether it's through your work with Saskatoon Sexual Health or the work that you are doing with Black Lives Matter. But Natalya, how do you know, or how will you know when your work is really making a difference, and maybe the impact that you hope it can make?
Oh, I'm not sure. I think that to a really small extent, I'm still waiting to see some change to the curriculum in Saskatchewan, to see that updated. We've met with the ministry about it in the past, and so I plan on being on their case. I just finished a really big project that I've been working on for a couple of years, and so I said to my boss, I was like, I've got nothing but time now. The ministry better watch out. But I think that, provincially, when we start to see our HIV infection rates dropping, when we start to see our teen pregnancy rates dropping, hepatitis C, all of those things, those are really good indicators. There is some research that came out just actually on Thursday, I think, showing that more youth in Saskatchewan than anywhere else use condoms.
Yes, I saw that.
And I was giddy. I was literally like, what? Yes, are you kidding me? And so those kinds of things are really reassuring and kind of help me see that we're on the right path. But I mean, at the end of the day, I'm just working for a future where people have all the resources they need to have happy and healthy lives. It seems so simple to me, and the fact that there's so much, opposition and resistance to those things is really frustrating.
I think you're awesome. This was just really wonderful to speak with you, and the work that you're doing and that you'll continue to do on so many different fronts. And thanks for for sharing so many stories, and for sharing some personal stories too. I appreciate it. So thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
My thanks to Natalya Mason for spending a Saturday morning with me and appearing on the podcast. If you want to learn more about Natalya's role at Saskatoon Sexual Health, visit saskatoonsexualhealth.ca. This has been episode 2 of season 3 of YXE Underground. My name is Eric Anderson. I host, produce, and edit this local independent podcast. You can subscribe for free to YXE Underground on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. And you can stream episodes on Spotify or the website yxeunderground.com. And that's where you can find all the episodes from the past 3 seasons. Don't forget to leave a review of the podcast if you like what you just heard. You can also follow YXE Underground on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. A big thank you to Carrie Davidson for taking such wonderful photos for this episode. We met here at the Vimy Memorial where I am right now, and Carrie managed to snap just some really lovely photos of Natalya, so be sure to check them out. Thank you to the good folks at Danger Dynamite here in Saskatoon for maintaining the website. A big thank you to my cousin, Andrew Dixon, for creating the music for the podcast. And Andrew, I hope you are staying safe in California with all the forest fires. Definitely thinking of you. Before I go, I would like to acknowledge that this interview was gathered on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Metis. YXE Underground is a production of the Salthammer Production Company. My name is Eric Anderson, and thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you soon, Saskatoon.